In 2015, a man named George Jameson came into contact with what he claimed to be a cursed object. It was an old phone from an antique store he had gone to numerous times before without incident. He claims the phone haunted him and tried to manipulate him into answering it, despite a stern warning not to. George shared his experience over the next few weeks with me, and now I'm going to share it with you in story format. It was mid-April, and my girlfriend Jenn and I had spent the last few hours going to different antique stores in our town. Most of the stores pretty much kept the same inventory, so it's rare for us to actually find something new. But we heard this store had just gotten in a bunch of new things. After walking up and down the aisles looking at old clothes, comics, mirrors, and general junk, we both found something we liked. The phone itself was totally unassuming and plain, a black plastic rotary phone with a white dial and a curly tan cord attaching the phone to the base. I just thought it would make a good decoration piece, so I picked it up and carried it with me while Jenn found something of her own. When we were done looking around, we went to the front desk and were greeted by an older lady that first noticed the small lamp my girlfriend was carrying. It had little stained glass pieces for a shade, and the woman excitedly told her it was a beautiful lamp that she was thinking of buying for herself. She was a very boppy lady at first, but the joy on her face disappeared when I set the phone on the counter. Her demeanor completely changed. It was obvious now she was forcing a smile. She told us the total, I paid, and she thanked us for shopping with her. We both grabbed the items we bought and headed out, but right at the door, the old lady said something in a quick, almost nervous way. "If that phone rings, don't answer it." I thought it was a little late for a joke, like she had taken too long in saying something clever, and probably should not have said anything at all. But either way, I casually offered to laugh so she wouldn't feel embarrassed or something. Once we were in the car, we talked about how awkward that was, and Jenn asked, what if it really did ring? I held the phone up to show her that the wall cord had been cut at the base. Not that we even had a phone outlet in our house, but with a cut cord it simply could not ring. We set up the stained glass lamp and the phone on a corner shelf. With the light plugged in and turned on, it gave the room a really unique look, like it was torn between modern and classic. We turned the lamp off and went about our day. Nothing happened around the house for about a week. We had walked by the lamp and phone dozens of times, and not once did we hear anything that would make us give a second thought to what the lady at the store had said. But all this changed when one evening we were sitting in the living room watching TV. We had all the lights off except for the stained glass lamp, which had become a favorite piece of ours. In the show we were watching, a phone rang. I jokingly paused it and reached over to the phone on the corner table under the lamp. I pretended to answer it while Jenn laughed and rolled her eyes. But my joke stopped as soon as I heard breathing on the other end. Jenn saw my face and still thought I was just messing around, so she didn't give me the time of day. I pressed the phone harder to my ear, but the sound was gone, if it was ever even there at all. But I guess I got pale or something because Jenn asked if I was alright, and I told her what I'd heard was real. She didn't believe me at first. Then she said it was probably just the sound of my own breathing, kind of echoing in the phone. Logically, I figured that was it, and we kept watching the show, but every so often I caught myself glancing at the old rotary phone, like it was going to do something. When our show was over, I checked all the locks, turned off the lamp, cast one more look at the phone, then headed to our room for bed. That night was the first night I heard the phone ring. My eyes opened to the sound of a shrill metallic bell. By reflex, I picked up my cell phone, but that's not the phone that was ringing. And mine didn't make that sound anyways. But now, nothing was ringing, and the house was silent. I checked the time to see it was 1 a.m. I laid in bed waiting to hear it again, but I never did hear another sound. I figured I must have dreamt it. The phone couldn't ring anyways, it wasn't hooked to anything. Jenn was asleep next to me, and she hadn't woken up, which meant she had not heard it. And I decided that I hadn't either, so I went back to sleep. The next day I told Jenn about my dream, and she agreed it was weird, but said if it had rung, she would have heard it too, and she didn't. Which was proof enough that it didn't ring because she was a very light sleeper. But the next night it happened again. Only this time the shrill metallic ring pulled me from sleep at 2 a.m. Once more I waited to see if I actually heard it. I just lay there listening for the ring. The house was silent. Then it came, another loud ring from the living room. I looked at Jenn, she was asleep. I felt bad, but still gently shook her awake. I told her to listen and that the phone really was ringing, but it wasn't. It didn't ring again. She huffed and went back to sleep. The next morning I had to apologize for waking her up while at the same time assuring her that I had actually heard the phone ring. Surprisingly, she believed me. She had a really good suggestion. Why don't we take the phone apart and see if maybe it had some sort of device in it that made it ring without being plugged in? Like a battery-operated prank phone or something. It sounded a little bit ridiculous at first, but really it was no more ridiculous than hearing it ring at all. I carefully took the phone apart with pliers and a screwdriver. But we didn't see any sort of battery or extra pieces. I went to put it back together, but she stopped me, at least to see what would happen that night if the phone was in pieces. She was very open to the possibility of it ringing again. She even told me to wake her up as soon as I heard the first ring, but that night it was incredibly hard to fall asleep. I kept wanting to check the time. I kept thinking it was going to ring at any minute. Finally, when I couldn't take it anymore, I looked at my phone to see it was only 11:30. I'd been in bed for maybe an hour, but I could only sit, waiting impatiently to either fall asleep or hear the phone ring. Finally, dreadfully, it rang. I nearly jumped out of bed and shook Jen at the same time. She shot up and we both waited. It rang again and the look on her face was priceless. She actually heard it too. I grabbed my phone to see it was now 3 a.m., which meant I had to have dozed off or something since it was only 11:30 a few minutes ago. Jen and I ran to the living room to see the phone lying in pieces from earlier. Yet right in front of us it rang for a third time. And we could actually see the pieces vibrating while it rang. Jen stood right next to me looking white as a sheet, and she whispered, "Answer it." I was absolutely terrified. The phone should not be ringing. It couldn't be. Yet it had. Someone or something was calling it. I picked up the receiver, which was just lying beside it, unplugged from the base of the phone. I started to bring it to my ear. Then the light turned on. I squinted and felt dazed by the sudden transition from darkness to light. "What are you doing?" My eyes hurt while they adjusted, but when they did, I saw Jen was standing by the living room entryway with her hand coming off the light switch and a sleepy look on her face. She was as confused as I was, but I was standing alone now, near the opposite wall with the phone receiver in my hand. "You told me to answer it," I said back to her, but right then she looked like she saw a ghost. Her voice was nearly shaking when she told me that the only reason she was up was she heard me open the bedroom door and leave the room. The truth was, we hadn't come into the living room together. She hadn't told me to answer that phone. But something had. Whatever it was had nearly succeeded in getting me to answer it. Right then, we put our shoes on. I threw every part of that phone into a bag. Then we got in the car, and when I thought we were far enough away from the house, I threw that phone out of the car window onto the side of the highway. It was the only thing I could think of doing. I didn't want any part of it near enough that if it rang again, we would hear it. We drove home in an awkward silence, and when we walked into the house and looked at the spot where it had been, we saw the stained glass lamp we had gotten that same day. After exchanging a quick look, she unplugged it, and we got right back into the car just to be sure. Now that phone is probably sitting in a landfill by now, joined by everything else people want to get rid of. It's been a really long time, but every now and then, I wonder if it still rings, and who would answer it if it does.